What's going on, Gator Nation? Nick Del Torre here with Corey Bender to recap early National Signing Day. Billy Napier's bump class, his first full class, 20 guys, and it used to be rare that guys would early enroll, Corey, but 16 of the 20 guys will be on campus. So we'll run down through this whole class, but I wanted to get your general thoughts on Billy Napier's first class.
Yeah, not too many surprises. I feel like down the stretch, I think it's kind of what we expected. I think with Florida, I always kind of said I thought they'd be a top 10 class, depending on where they would fall. We still have a few kids left on the board they'll be announcing, but I think overall there's certain position groups that they really knocked out of the park with. I think defensive line, you don't have that five-star number one headliner in the class, but you still have all of them are four stars, headlined by Kelby Collins of Alabama. So I think overall it's a pretty good class. Wide receiver, you got three really good playmakers in Aiden Mazzell, Eugene Wilson, and Andy Jean. Three of the best in the Sunshine State, but I think overall, I think it's a pretty solid class. We'll see how the rest of it plays out. We have two priority targets still on the board, and then I think also too down the stretch yesterday, people were worried about Jaden Rashada. Where's his national letter intent? Is there a reason for concern? But I think kind of adding him late was the cherry on top. It almost the way it played out almost made it better, in my opinion. It's like you already know you had a good class, but he was the final one to put it in to really give you that quarterback for the future. So I think overall you have to be pleased. I think it's a pretty solid class.
Yeah, and I think when I look at it, especially the skill positions, when you look at, like you mentioned, the wide receiver class, when you look at the defensive back class with guys like Eugene Wilson, who I think might be the most special or electric player in this class, Andy Jean, and I know there was some FSU smoke late there after he took 2 visits to FSU, but you hold on to him in the class, a Treon Webb. At running back, and Bryce Thornton, another kid who I think that Billy Napier spoke really highly of. So a lot of guys at skill position players, as Florida needs to retool and re-up in that wide receiver room and in the secondary. Looking at the class, let's go to Jaden Rashada. Obviously, everyone wants to talk about the quarterback. What do you think it was? Obviously, Florida came down to Florida, Miami. He picks Miami, flips to Florida, and then you'd probably like to have your quarterback be the first national letter of intent in. He ends up being the last. Maybe we'll chalk it up to Pacific time, him being out in California. How big is this for Florida? This is the biggest quarterback signee for Florida since who?
As far as ranking wise, Driscoll. Well, he was 2011, I believe, right? I think Driscoll was 2011 class. I think ranking wise, he's the highest. Well, it's funny you say that. He's the highest as far as signees. Lagway, who's committed in the 2024 class, he's the highest ranked commit since Driscoll. So either way, those are the three guys. So either way, as far as signing, he's right up there. Highest is Felipe Franks as far as signees. But I think overall with him, man, I think many people believe he is the strongest arm in the class. When it came down to recruiting, he always wanted to play in the SEC. Florida was one of his dream schools. And like you said, it was a nail biter over the summer. It came down to Miami and Florida. Florida had momentum. It went back towards the Miami, and we all know it's the NIL era and the way how that operates now in recruiting. So, but Florida didn't really push Florida away. They stayed on it. They knew those relationships were very strong. Both parties had a great vibe with one another. So kudos to Florida. I think in the recruiting nowadays, when it comes to certain guys, you lose out and you kind of move on. You'll ask kids, hey, are you still in communication with this one school after they commit elsewhere? And they're like, no, I haven't really heard much from them lately. But Florida, when it came to Rashada, even though they lost out Miami, it was kind of a kick in the stomach over the summer. They stayed on it, and look what happened. They stayed persistent. They got his commitment. But I think with Florida, it's a fairly thin quarterback room. Obviously with Richardson off to the NFL. I think overall with Jack Miller, you saw some glimpses in the bowl game of what he can do, but I think overall, like behind him, it's fairly thin. You need a guy you can kind of build this program around. I think Miller obviously gets the nod next year. You have Graham Mertz from Wisconsin. I think those two guys battle out. But I think you have your quarterback in the future with Rashada. So, and then you have Lagway. I know it's a whole other year to go. He's not signed. But if you somehow sign him too next year, I mean, you have two really great options for years to come. So I think you have to be pretty happy, at least with the direction of Florida's quarterback room for the next several years.
Yeah, and I think if something had gone sideways with Jaden Rashada, you start talking to DJ Lagway, being like, "Hey, how many credits do you have left? Can we get you into some online classes? Can we reclassify you?" That ends up not being the case or not needing to be the case. But yeah, I think a lot of fans yesterday were talking about Jaden Rashada being the starting quarterback. Like, listen, he'll get the opportunity. I just don't think Florida goes into 2023 saying, "Yeah, no, we're going to start a true freshman quarterback." In 2023, and we're going to throw him out there, and he'll start against Utah at Utah.
And we know this staff isn't shy about playing true freshmen, but offensive line and quarterback are the two positions you really typically don't rush a kid unless there's like you just don't have a choice with injury or whatnot. But he's a talented kid, but obviously it's a big adjustment, from just a physical standpoint, playing the SEC. And you kind of saw with Anthony Richardson a few years ago when we kind of threw him in against Georgia, and just kind of like even from a confidence standpoint, you want to make sure the kid's ready. So I think overall, like I said before, Mertz and I think Jack Miller battle it out next year. They'll give Rashad every chance to earn that job. But I think for both parties, I think it's best for him to kind of sit back and learn that first year. And then, that following year, make a real run for that starting job.
Right. And then we've talked about the quarterbacks, the skill position players. Let me talk about the hogs down in the offensive line in the trenches. One of the guys that Billy Napier really spoke highly of yesterday was Roger Kearney, a former Florida State commit, had one of the most wild commitments that I've ever seen. He was leaving as a Florida official and was probably still in a car with a Florida staffer. And when he tweets that he's committing to FSU, they, again, stick with him and get the flip in his commitment. Billy Napier yesterday said this is one of, not in our class, one of the best films. If you throw the film on, one of the best films of any offensive lineman in the country. What's your opinion of Roger Kearney?
Yeah, I like him a lot. He's a wrestler as well. That's good from a leverage standpoint when it comes to offensive lineman. Really good frame, versatile, but also plays with a nasty streak. And I think that combination is probably what Billy's referring to. This kid checks off a lot of boxes. So I think with Kearney, man, I think, he's one of those guys he has to kind of add some weight, but in a good way. He's not one of those guys you have to trim down because he has bad weight. He's a guy who I think overall will really fill out well once he gets into Florida's strength and conditioning program. So I think overall, I think he was a great get for Florida. A kid that I think will be a multi-year starter, in Gainesville, depending on what years those are. But I think he's a guy who can play tackle. I think he can play guard. His skill set definitely. You look at his skill set the way on film, he definitely has a really good guard film. He's a mauler. So I think overall you gotta be happy, and I'm really big on guys that wrestle along the offensive line, just from that one-on-one power, controlling a guy, leverage, getting underneath. I think that really helps a lot of these kids as far as progressing and when they can get on the field a little bit earlier than others. So I'm definitely, that was a massive commitment. I think it goes back to what we just talked about the staff saying, guys. I mean, when Kearney committed FSU, it was kind of a slap in the face to Florida. I mean, he just left Gainesville, and it was kind of like, wow, like what went wrong? How did this kid just commit to FSU? He's just in Gainesville. And there's some staffs I imagine across the country and be like, whatever,
Cross him off.
Yeah, like we're not dealing with this kid. But it's nothing against the kid. He's a good kid. He just had his mind made up. But yeah, exactly. They stayed on him, and now he's a signing for the Florida Gators. So in addition to FSU arguably having a better year than Florida on the field.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it just shows relationships in the future and the blueprint of why kids want to join Billy Napier's program.
Yeah, you mentioned the size. I agree with you. You'd probably rather have a guy be a little undersized and add some weight than have to drop 40 pounds to then gain 15, 20. The other two guys, the other two offensive linemen in the class, Najee Harris, already has the size, 6'3", 328 listed, and Bryce Lovett, 6'5", 336 pounds. Not sure what they're feeding them at Rockledge High School in the cafeteria, but he had plenty of it. Those are some big boys. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. Who is your favorite signee, whether it's someone that you dealt with and you just liked interviewing them and talking to them, whether it's somebody that you love their film or you think that they're ready to come right in. Who's your favorite signee in this 2023 class?
I would probably say Eugene Wilson. And I say that one, I've seen him a bunch of times live, and he's just he's always one missed tackle away from lighting up the scoreboard. And I think with Florida, depending on Ricky Pearsall what he does, depending if he comes back or not, I think Florida has a true need in the slot. They need that make a guy miss, and I'm gonna take it to the house type of playmaker. And I think with him, he's not all about being in the spotlight. Yeah, he didn't even attend one Florida game this year. He literally was all about Gaither High School, and you don't see that ever. Like he was at the spring game, but he's just literally he got hurt a little bit this year and bounced back. And his mission was, hey, I want to win a state title. Then I'll do a Florida after. So he committed. I like him off the field. He committed to Florida, shut his recruitment down, all about business. But when he's on the field, yeah, I mean he's a dangerous playmaker who can really. I mean, Florida needs that type of guy. And I think overall too, and it's funny you talked about him yesterday. I saw on Twitter is Bryce Thornton, just a guy I think is undervalued. We have him as a 4-star, but he's kind of a do-it-all guy at safety. Really sound tackler. Really good on special teams. I mean, good in coverage, high points to ball. He's kind of that guy that checks off a lot of boxes. I think if he was just a little bit bigger, his ranking would be even much higher. He's 5'10", 185, but if he was a guy that was 6 foot, 6'1", I think his ranking would be even higher. Georgia, Alabama, Miami, Tennessee, the list goes on. All these schools offered him, but Florida knocked out of the park with relationships. They really treat him like a major priority from the start. But yeah, those are two guys that kind of come to mind. And another guy I'll probably mention too. I like Jordan Castell a lot. He's a really good kid. One I got a good relationship with. Love his film. He's productive at receiver too. High points to ball, good size, and another guy that's very mature. I think who's going to come in with a business-like mindset, and I think he's a guy I'll probably see the field fairly early in Gainesville.
All right, we're going to turn our attention away from this sheet here, from all the guys that signed, because there's a couple guys that have commitments coming up today. Let's start with cornerback Desmond Ricks, who reclassified from the 2024 class. What's the latest? What are the tea leaves saying? What's the smoke on Desmond Ricks?
LSU was a school trending for much of the last several months. That's still my pick. I put in a prediction for LSU yesterday, but there was a little bit of just kind of. I mean, there hasn't been pure confidence from any school. LSU feels good. I know Florida felt good, coming out of the visit. The cohesiveness in Gainesville, the relationships from Corey Raymond. I know his mother, when I talked to her, called Corey Raymond the best DB's coach in the country. So Florida checks off a lot of boxes, but you see where the current status of LSU and Alabama, where they are on the field right now. I think that's obviously a separator a little bit, in my opinion. They probably won't say that, but I think that obviously that helps them. But with LSU, that's still my prediction. I know, they always call it DBU. I know he has great relationships out in Baton Rouge. What I've heard over the last 24 hours, though, is that Alabama has kind of made it a little bit more interesting, too. Conversations are still taking place with them as they are with Florida. But I think right now, Florida finishes third. LSU and Alabama, I kind of give LSU the slight edge. But Alabama, there's a little bit of smoke with them, too. So we'll see. I don't think anyone there was talks about him not telling any of the staffs beforehand what he was going to do. So I mean, there is still kind of that mystique about it, kind of coming down the stretch. But Florida did a great job with him, man. I feel like they've done all they could. The family's on board with Florida. Obviously you can see the field early, play under Corey Raymond. There's a lot of stuff that Florida can offer him, but LSU's been buzzing for a reason. That was definitely the real smoke. So we'll see how it plays out. But I'm going to go with the Tigers for now.
And who is and I think everyone's favorite recruit this cycle, Cormani McClain. What's going on? What's going on with Cormani? I think he shocked the world picking Miami over Alabama and Florida, and then he shocked the world yesterday, just not signing today.
Yeah, so I talked to someone in Gainesville yesterday when he didn't sign, spoke to a source, and they told me they thought if it was going to be anyone at that time when I spoke to them, it'd be Alabama. That was the school they thought. From what I've heard, there hasn't been, I mean, there hasn't been on the confidence level for Florida. I don't expect them to land at Florida. Never say never. I mean, like you said, this recruitment's been a whirlwind, but that's not one of the schools I've been hearing, down the stretch here. I know Colorado is, I know Sam Spiegelman put in a prediction for Colorado. And
Prime's gonna make a smash.
yeah, so that's the other one. So I think overall, you got to look at Colorado as a real threat. Obviously, you'd be coached up by arguably the best DB of all time, and that's something to think about. And Travis Hunter committed last night, so I mean, thinking you put Cremani McLean and Travis Hunter at corner at Colorado. I mean, I don't know who's going to want to throw at that team. So I think overall, that's the one school, and then there's some confidence in Miami too. I think Miami, that's the other school. I mean, he's committed there. There's still some confidence that he could end up in that class, so you can't write off Miami. So I think right now, Alabama maybe is the background dark horse, even though confidence isn't crazy high in Tuscaloosa either. But I think going to Boulder or staying put with Miami are probably the two most likely options right now.
Primetime's gonna make a splash. He made a splash at Jackson State, and now you've got some more resources there at Colorado. That'll be interesting to see. Another name, probably the last name for today, will be Jordan Hall. Big guy, big defensive line recruit that Florida's kind of been on. I think it's also a Georgia battle there. What's the latest on Jordan Hall and his signing today?
Yeah, man. So I'm going Georgia. They've been the most consistent. They've been viewed as the leader for much of, probably the second half of this year. LSU and Alabama are in the mix too, but I think Florida's probably second on his list. One of those things, Florida is knocked out of the park in his recruitment, man. I mean, he raves about the relationships in Gainesville. I mean, almost the whole staff is involved with him. I mean, they really want that kid in Gainesville. They think he can see the field very early as well. But I know Alabama, I think Trey Scott, that's his best relationship in recruiting, regardless of school. And I know that's been key. It kind of goes back to John Walker with Coach Martin at UCF. That was his best relationship. So relationships with both those kids have been very important. Georgia obviously coming off a national title. I know he just loves it up in Athens. So I think Georgia's going to be the heavy favorite. They still are heading into the decision today. But I think Florida's right there, man. I think Florida's in the mix. I always say never. You know how recruiting can be. But I think it's Georgia, then Florida, and then give or take, I don't know which one, 3 or 4 for Alabama and LSU. But all eyes are on the Bulldogs right now for Jordan Hall.
Right. Now, and I think overall, if Florida misses out on those two kids today, you look at the class that you have. And I think it's a solid class. You hit on a bunch of needs. You needed some safeties, some defense, some cornerbacks, defensive backs. You needed a receiver. You got 3 of them. Did you miss on a defensive tackle and inside linebackers? Obviously you get one in Jaden Robinson, but I think you need more. It's a dire situation at inside linebacker for Florida. So there's still time. You need to hit on guys in the portal. You need to finish strong. Once the dust settles and figure who is still left before the February signing day to kind of shore up the class. I think it's a good class. You hit a bunch of needs. You got your quarterback. Unfortunately, you're in the SEC. So your top 10 class is 4th in your own conference. So I don't think that Florida did enough to close the gap recruiting wise with Alabama, who put together the #1 class in the country, or with Georgia. And Georgia's not dominating college football right now just because they had one good recruiting class. This is Kirby Smart put together, I think, back-to-back #1 classes, and he had 4 out of 5. They had the #2 class, I think, in On3 rankings, or a top 3, if not #2. It just takes that consistent effort. So this class is good. I think you need to start seeing Florida win more battles and get a little bit closer to Alabama and Georgia, if not overtake them, if you want to start beating them on the field. But I think getting DJ Lagway in this early and having that quarterback being able to help you recruit the rest of the year, the rest of the cycle, it's huge.
No, 100%, man. And it kind of goes back with like Jordan Hall, with Georgia, projected to win out. And him being in Jacksonville, that's a guy that you could definitely get. It's a realistic addition for Florida. But it just shows, that momentum Georgia has right now. In Florida, obviously they went through coaching change. Georgia's a stable program right now. They're in two different spots, granted, but yeah, it's just those are the type of battles you kind of need to win. And then getting a kid out like even Kelby Collins though, like he was an Alabama fan, growing up. Alabama was projected to get him for much as recruitment. Even the other staff at Florida under Mullen, they're in a good spot for him, but I always thought they probably finished second or third. And then this staff came in. That was a really big statement get for Florida and Alabama, which is very rare when a kid leaves Alabama, those top kids. Same with Louisiana to go to another SEC school. So I think getting him was on board, but you had James Smith and Hugh Russo, the 5-star teammates. They went to Alabama. You can't get them all, but I think they're taking the necessary steps. So they won some battles this cycle that maybe in previous years they would have came up a little bit short. So they always say everything isn't built overnight. So I think they took getting Rashada, that was a huge one. From a kid all on the other side of the country. So I think Florida's taking the next steps, but I think with the portal, that's where they need to kind of make their next splash because I know linebacker, they're fairly thin. Receiver and D-line. That's why with Jordan Hall, I mean, they have a really good D-line class, Florida. Obviously, adding Hall is like, okay, that's the cherry on top. But you still got to be pleased with Sean Spencer and what he did this cycle. We just got to see how this plays out. Portal's going to be huge going into February because when you look at their big board right now, it's not a huge board at the high school level that Florida will be signing in February. You have Caden Jones, 6'8" offensive tackle out of Louisiana, who Florida's in the top 2 with Texas A&M. But there's not many guys out there that right now are realistic targets for February. So I think portal's the next big, main focus for this team.
Well, the next main focus for Corey Bender needs to be getting some rest. It was a busy Wednesday. Let's let you get to sleep. It's going to continue to be busy. We were in the middle of basketball season. Baseball is 50 days away. The transfer portal is white hot. So make sure you're coming to Gators Online for all your Florida Gator news. I'm Nick Delatorre for Corey Bender. Thanks for tuning in.